You've tuned in to Larger Than Life with Pastor Ron Hint of Calvary Chapel, Houston. Here's a preview from Pastor Ron of today's message.
And so it is any surprise, he says, you need to give a portion back to me so that, first of all, you realize it comes from me and you're helping others. So listen, all of that, we never want to forget. These guys said, it's our nation, it's our thing. No, it's not. You guys were only there because God placed you there. And I realize that where God has me at any time, God could take that away anytime he wants. It's not mine to control. Nothing is. Not my home, not what I do in serving people in the church, none of it. It's all Jesus. We all need to remember that mindset.
Have you ever thought about why you are where you are? Sure, you have certain talents and abilities, but why do you have those things? Some may say they inherited their abilities from their family line, or they were developed through hard work. In today's message, Pastor Ron reminds you that everything you have and can do is because of God. Nothing is yours to control, and it all comes from and belongs to God. This is why you're called to give back to God and to serve others. Well, let's join Pastor Ron in the book of John chapter 11 as he begins his message, The Plan to Kill Jesus.
Take out your Bibles, turn to the Gospel of John chapter 11. Going through the Gospel of John, we've entitled it Identity because this whole book is all about revealing and talking about who Jesus is, his true identity, that he is God. And today we come to the conclusion of John chapter 11. We're going to be looking at verses 45 to 57. And it began a few weeks ago. We saw the raising of Lazarus from the dead. The interesting thing is before Jesus did that, in verse 25, he said, hey, I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me, though he perish, he shall live. And so he said, I can raise the dead. And guess what? He not only said it, he did it. He raised Lazarus from the dead. But here's the thing. What Jesus did with Lazarus physically is exactly what Jesus does with every single person that surrenders their heart to Jesus spiritually. The Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:17 that if a person gives their life to Christ, he's made a new person. Old things pass away. In fact, the word used, it says he makes them a new creation. We become new individuals, and how exciting that is. We'll talk a little bit about that even as we move through here this morning. But as we come to the end of this section here, we come to the impact that it had, the impact that took place once Lazarus was raised from the dead. And we're going to see, of course, as there are those that had no response. We're going to see some that believed. And, of course, we're also going to see here the evil intention of those who rejected Jesus. And so I've entitled our message today, The Plan to Kill Jesus. The Sanhedrin, controlled by Caiaphas, who was the high priest at that time, is enraged because Jesus' popularity is now hitting a zenith, and at the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead. And there's now this feverish plan to put him to death. And so we'll see that response as well as others. In fact, we've written it in your outline this morning. We see 4 responses. We're going to look at the many. We're told in verse 45, many believed. We're going to look at the murderers. That's the religious elite. We're going to look at the multitudes that were actually undecided. That's the majority of people. And then we'll look at the faithful disciples. That's Mary, Martha, and others. Now, let me say this. We're going to spend the majority of our time looking at the first 2 points. So that'll kind of give you an indication of our time. But let me say this. Everyone pretty much falls into these various categories when it comes down to it. When it comes down to it, when you learn about Jesus and so forth, there are others who believe. They place their faith in the Lord. There are also those who do not believe. In fact, they refuse to believe, and they may even get mad. There are those, many, who are actually undecided. They really don't have an opinion. But then again, there are those that are following the Lord, and they're faithful. Well, let's set this scene before we get into this passage. As I mentioned, in the earlier chapters, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Back in verse 31, it tells us he had actually been dead and buried 4 days. That's a long time. And so Jesus gathered around the sepulcher, the tomb, the grave, which, by the way, was a mass grave. That's how they buried people in those days. They would be family burial sites, and they would use them over generation and generation. They would gather the bones, then put them in what's called an ossuary, and they'd set them aside. And then if someone recently died, they would place them there. They would come back a year later, gather the bones, and so forth. But Lazarus has been there just for 4 days. And now Jesus comes, and in verse 43, he says, Lazarus, come forth. And we mentioned last time the reason why he calls Lazarus his name, because had Jesus only said, hey, come forth, the whole family would have come out of the grave, right? Hey, there's grandma and great grandma, you know. So Lazarus come forth. Jesus raises him from the dead. I mean, imagine this. Jesus creates new flesh that had been decomposed, new nerves, new cells, new muscle tissue. His heart started beating that had been lifeless for 4 days, his veins pulsating with life-giving blood. Lazarus was raised from the dead. That is power, that's undeniable power. In fact, it was so dynamic, it was so public, it couldn't be overlooked. This was the conversation that everybody was talking about. I mean, think about if this happened, if your next door neighbor was raised from the dead. When was the last time you heard of that happening? Yeah, that didn't happen too often, right? But if it did, everybody be gathering down your street. Man, the newspapers would be called. You can't believe this guy was dead 4 days. He's back to life. So it was so astounding, it was polarizing to the people. And you couldn't sweep it under the carpet. He was a walking testimony of the power of Jesus. Think about that. Lazarus was a walking miracle. Now, think about this. If you're a Christian, you sometimes hear people that talk about their testimony, right? You've probably heard incredible testimonies of people. Maybe they lived just an ungodly life, or maybe it was a life of drugs, or maybe a life of crime, or whatever it is, and somewhere down the line they surrender their life to the Lord, and it's this incredible transformation, this incredible testimony. And sometimes we think, well, no, I'd never have a testimony like that. Listen, if you're a Christian, my friend, you have an awesome testimony. You were once dead, the Bible says, in your trespasses and your sin, and Christ made you alive. You've become a new person in Christ Jesus. You're a walking testimony of the power of Christ. You just tell people, I do that all the time. This is who I was. This is what I did. This is what I thought about doing. These were my actions. And once I gave my life to Jesus, everything began to change. Am I perfect? No. But I can tell you what, I am not the same person I used to be. Is that me, my power? No, it's the Lord. The Lord did it. And he did that with every single one of you. Don't forget, your life as a believer is a powerful testimony. So Lazarus is a walking testimony. And here's the interesting thing. As we're going to look at this story here today, we realize that no one, even the religious leaders, don't deny the miracle. Isn't that amazing? Well, of course you could. I mean, Lazarus is a walking miracle. It's dynamic, it's public, you can't overlook it. And it wasn't overlooked. So here we see the various responses. And the first is the many. We find this verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things that Jesus did, raising Lazarus from the dead, believed in him. This large crowd had assembled there near Mary and Martha's house there in Bethany, and they had seen this glorious miracle that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and it says that they believed in him. Now, there's actually only one word that's a tragedy in this verse. Notice it says, many of the Jews, when they saw the things Jesus did, believed in him. The only tragedy is it doesn't say all. It says many believe. I wish it said all, because that's the heart of God. In 2 Timothy 2:4, it says that God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And that's you today if you don't know Jesus. That's you today if you've never made a commitment. He wants you to be in the kingdom of God. So not everyone believed, but many did. Now, let me also say this. We don't want to mistake this, though, for all of Palestine. It's not the many of Palestine. It's the many that were gathered there at the resurrection of Lazarus. But there was a lot of them. Now, it says they believed, but here's the key thing. Believed in what? I mean, because we've talked about this before. There are a lot of people that believe a lot of things, right? There were some people not long ago, there was a comet on the other side out in our universe, in our galaxy, actually, I should say. It was called Hale-Bopp, and there were a bunch of people that believed Jesus was on the other side of it, and they were going to connect with the comet Hale-Bopp. They were in San Diego, California. Don't believe it. They were called Heaven's Gate, it was called. And then they all committed mass suicide. They believed it. Well, and they were sincere, but they were obviously sincerely wrong. So it's very important what we believe. Now, here's the beautiful thing. It tells us in here, these people believed in him. Who's that? That's Jesus. They placed their faith in Jesus Christ. Listen, faith is hopeless and it is pointless if it isn't based in Jesus Christ. The Bible doesn't give us optional ways. We're not given choices of how we want to be saved. We'd like to think that because who doesn't like multiple choice tests, right? Those are the best, aren't they? Because you at least have, I think I might get it right. Those were my favorite tests in school, the multiple choice. Because then I might see the right one there and I can kind of guess. But we think that salvation is multiple choice. Let's see. I'd like to be saved by A, being a good moral person. Oh, I like that. I'd like to be saved by B, believing that all roads lead to heaven. Or I'd like C, I'm the master of my own destiny and whatever I believe is the truth, right? But guess what? It's none of the above. It's none of the above. The Bible tells us salvation is not multiple choice. There's only one way to be saved. It's through faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, think of it this way. You know, in our universe, we have inviolable laws of God. Now, we call them laws of nature, but we know there are laws exist in our planet, in our solar system, with all things that cannot be changed. One of the ones that we're all familiar with is gravity, right? It's gravity. You can't deny it. It's always there. You can't get around it. So that if a person decides to jump off a 50-story building, it's not multiple response of what the results will be. It's not A, I'm gonna fly. It's not B, I'm gonna transfer my molecules from here to over there and I'll be fine. No, it's C, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. That's the law of gravity. It's gonna happen every single time. And when it comes to spiritual laws, and the greatest of which is salvation, there's only one way. It's faith in Jesus Christ. In Acts 4:12, it says this, there is salvation in no other person except for Jesus Christ. For there's no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. So it tells us they believed, but it's important who they believed in. You know, James chapter 2 and verse 19 tells us that the demons believe and tremble. So if you didn't know this, the devil and demons, which are fallen angels, they actually believe that Jesus Christ is God. He died on the cross for the sins of the world. He rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven and he's seated at the right hand of the Father. Demons believe that. They know that to be factual, but they're not saved. So they haven't put their trust in God. And so we need to believe, place our faith, our trust in God, and that's exactly what they did. So that's the many. A good group of people saw the resurrection of Lazarus, said, Jesus is the Messiah. They trusted him. But against the backdrop of the many, we come to the murderers in verses 46 and 54. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them, these are those that didn't believe. They left. I got to tell somebody. They told the Pharisees the things that Jesus did. Now, Lazarus was well known in the community. And many of the prominent Jews were obviously there to mourn his death. They didn't believe in Jesus. They came in unbelief. They left in unbelief. They couldn't wait to tell the Pharisees. And understand, this is not a positive motive here. They're not saying, oh man, we got to tell the Pharisees about this. This is good news. No, they set off in hatred with evil intent. The word but here is used in stark contrast. Many believed, but there were those who rejected Jesus. They want to inform the Pharisees. They got a problem on their hands. I mean, their thinking is this: many are coming to Jesus. Many of here are following Jesus. They're following this Jesus. What are we going to do? So understand this: in the minds of these people, and we're going to see the religious leaders themselves, it wouldn't have mattered had Jesus resurrected the entire cemetery. They would not have believed. These unbelievers here are so concerned about Jesus's popularity. I mean, it's picking up steam, that what is happening, it's threatening their way of life. And so these men take off with hatred in their hearts. And understand this, as the religious leaders hear this now, they've been boiling over with Jesus for some time, but this would be the straw that breaks the camel's back. This would be the act that now causes the Sanhedrin to place a warrant for the arrest of Jesus, as we're going to see, and eventually put him to death several weeks from now. So these unbelievers immediately go tell the Pharisees. Now look at verse 47. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees counseled together. And so here we're introduced to what is called the Sanhedrin. This is the council. Now the Sanhedrin was composed of 70 members plus the high priest. And they governed the social, religious, and even many of the political activities that went on within the city and within the province. When Judea became a Roman province in AD 6, The Sanhedrin was given almost exclusive control of the internal affairs of the people, allowed autonomy to worship Jehovah, allowed to govern the affairs of what people can and cannot do outside of military. And there were other things that they had to be accountable for, but they definitely were in cahoots, in collusion with Rome. Now, this council consisted of two basic groups. We have the Pharisees, and then we'll talk about the Sadducees that made up the chief priest, the high priest, and so forth. But the Pharisees, these are the religious conservatives. They were legalists. They believed in all of the Old Testament, all of the law, so much so that they saw themselves as separated unto it. That's what the word Pharisee means. And they gave themselves to it. But of course, as you give yourself to the law, you realize you can't keep the law. No one can keep the law. The Bible tells us in the New Testament, that's why the law was written, to show us we can't do it, so that we say, God, I need you. I need your help. I need to cry out for mercy. But they said, oh no, we got to do this every single bit. But they realized they couldn't. So what they do is they would stack up external regulations and rules that they could keep, man-made traditions, in order to look like they were law-abiding. But deep inside, they were not. They were far from God, and they really became hypocrites. Now, the second group of people are the Sadducees. These are the religious liberals because they don't accept all of the law. Only what is in the book of Moses, only the Torah. They don't accept the other things, and even many things there they did not accept. But they were the aristocratic party. They were the blue bloods. They were the ones that had most of the money. The chief priests and the high priests always came from the sect of the Sadducees. And let me tell you something. These people lived high on the scale of living, higher than most Roman citizens. When you excavate the areas of ancient Jerusalem, we'll take people there when we go on a tour, we will go where these people lived. They had homes with multiple rooms, mosaics. I mean, they lived they extorted the people. They made money off them, of course. We've seen that. These are the guys that controlled the temple concessions and so forth. But here you have this group of the Sadducees. And here's one of the other things we need to note is that the resurrection of Lazarus is also a great irritation to them, that Jesus does this miracle. It's like adding salt into a festering wound. Why? Well, because Luke chapter 20 tells us that the Sadducees, that group, did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in resurrection. That's why I said they were very biblically liberal. By the way, that's how they get their name. I mean, they don't believe in the resurrection, and that's why they're sad, you see. Anyway, just want to make sure you're awake. So keep in mind, they're constantly collaborating with Rome in order to keep their influence, their authority. They would do anything in collusion with them to keep that influence and that power. So the first thing we read here, verse 47, is the chief priests, the Pharisees, are gathered in a council. So this is the religious mucky-mucks. I mean, these are the guys that should have their eyes on the things of God, their ears open to God, looking and waiting for the coming Messiah. And having seen themselves and heard many times what Jesus has done, and now hearing the miracle of Lazarus, they at least would have checked it out. Really? I mean, you would think these guys would say, Jesus is the Messiah. But they don't even check it out. Instead, they call for a little private meeting. And what's the agenda? It says, and they said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. Now, the first thing, which is pretty amazing, is that they don't refute the miracle. They actually acknowledge here Jesus did many works and signs. So they don't even doubt that Jesus raised the dead. You would think that's it. Man, he does it. This is the Messiah. But there's so much animosity. There's so much hatred. They hear this report. It doesn't matter to them. Long ago, they have already made up their mind that Jesus is not the one they want. And because they don't care about the truth, which is the sad thing, they reject him. All they care about doing is controlling their own interests. So they didn't reject the miracle. How about that? They don't reject the miracle. They reject Jesus. They don't deny the fact that Lazarus was raised from the dead. They reject Jesus. And again, this is the sadness. This is the blindness and the foolishness of unbelief. Unbelief says it doesn't matter about the truth. It doesn't matter about, I don't need to hear the truth. My mind is already made up. And that's a sad thing. I've experienced that lately with a group. It doesn't matter about the truth. My mind is made up, and that's a sad thing. But verse 48 tells us why they were thinking this way. Notice this. Their thought was this: if we let him alone like this, if we let Jesus just keep going around and raising people from the dead and doing miracles and so forth, everyone will believe in him. Well, that's pretty much the idea, just so you know that. That's the point. But Rome will come and take away both our place and our nation. So there's their heart. They're worried about their political, social power and the prestige that comes along with it. They're fearing Jesus' popularity is getting too big. It's snowballing. We're losing our influence over these people. In their minds, the religious leaders, they're losing ground. If they don't do something about it, they might be out of a job. They might be out of all the good things that they have. The bottom line is this: they didn't care about Jesus. They only were concerned about themselves. In fact, notice the way it says here, the Romans will come and take away both our place, our nation. They saw it as theirs. The temple is theirs. God's house is theirs. The nation is theirs. Hold on a second, it's not. But that's the way they saw it. So when Jesus, God himself, comes on the scene, they see Jesus as an intrusion. So this brings up just a couple of points that I want to see just here. First of all, again, it says ours. They take away our nation, our seats of authority, our stuff. We need to be reminded, ladies and gentlemen, everything we have is not ours. Everything we have is not ours. It's the Lord's. God, in his graciousness and his kindness, has given things to us, and they're his, and we're just stewards of what he gives us. Your talents that you have, the treasure you have, the time you have, the allotted time, it's not yours. The Lord gave it to you. So it isn't any wonder when we read the scriptures that God asks of those things of us. I mean, is it your talent? Many of you have many talents. You're able to use your gifts and talents maybe in your business or in the place you work. But you know what? God also wants you to take that talent and that gift that you have and use it for his glory. And use it in his church, for his people, to be a witness to him. That's why he's given you that talent and ability. God has also given you time. We all have a certain amount of time that we're going to live on this earth. Now, I realize we have priorities. If you're married, you also have time to your spouse. You have children, obviously time to your children. There's family. And obviously you have to work a job, but also a portion of your time is to be dedicated to the Lord. Giving him time. Giving him time just to have a relationship with him, but also giving him time to serve him, to serve others. And then the treasure you have, the things that you have, what God gives you in possession and money, that came from him. You say, no, I worked hard for it. Who gave you the hands to work it? Who gave you the mind to think it? God did. And so it is any surprise, he says, you need to give a portion back to me so that, first of all, you realize it comes from me and you're helping others. So listen, all of that, we never want to forget. These guys said, it's our nation, it's our thing. No, it's not. You guys were only there because God placed you there. And I realize that where God has me at any time, God could take that away anytime he wants. It's not mine to control. Nothing is. Not my home, not what I do in serving people in the church, none of it. It's all Jesus. We all need to remember that mindset. Let me also say this, that the second thing we see here is that they saw Jesus as an intrusion. Jesus is going to come take this away. Look at what we've done, and they see Jesus as an intrusion. You know what? That can happen in our life. That we see everything that can, especially, we don't mind the good times. Man, Jesus is good. He blessed me. But when bad stuff happens, and boy, have we experienced bad lately with this storm. And we can see that as an intrusion. God's messed up my stuff. God's done this to me. Look what God did. And we get mad at God. But maybe God was trying to get our attention. Suffice to say, he got all of our attention. But maybe he's getting all of us in different areas of what's a priority, what's important, or trusting him. But we never want to see God working in our life as an intrusion. Say, God, what do you think you're doing? Because God has a plan. He always is thinking of our good, whatever he allows in our life.
Thanks for joining us here today on Larger Than Life as we go through the Gospel of John. Gospel means good news, and the good news that John shares is summed up in the most well-known verse in the Bible, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. That's good news indeed. Today's teaching from Pastor Ron Hint and others like it can be found on our mobile app, so go to ltlradio.org to find the link. Larger Than Life is also available in podcast format, so please subscribe if you want to stay connected and immersed in our teachings. In case you've forgotten, that website again is ltlradio.org. Larger Than Life is a ministry of Calvary Houston and Pastor Ron Hint in Friendswood, Texas. If you're in the Friendswood area, we'd love to meet you. We have Sunday morning services at 9 and 11 a.m. and every Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you have questions about what you heard today, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to call us at 281-648-5800. Again, that number is 281-648-5800. Thanks so much for listening. We're so happy that you spent time with us today. Join us again next time as Pastor Ron has more to teach from the Gospel of John right here on Larger Than Life.